Hello, hello. It's Wisdom Wednesday, and a very special one at that, because I'm very privileged to be speaking with Mr. Singh, former mayor of Port of Spain. He served between 2010 and 2013. Strangely enough, for Mr. Singh, that time period, I was just out of Trinidad. I left in December of 2010 and did not return till 2014 December. I was out for 4 years, so I missed your tenure. But Mr. Singh is an author. He is the author of 3 books. I am going to speak with him about the third, which is entitled Closer to the Church. It is his first novel. His first book, Local Government in Trinidad, Conspiracy Against the People, was done after his tenure in office, so I suppose it's full of true experiences and what he has thought. I have not had the privilege to read it as yet. And his second book, I Used to Live in Heaven, Letters to My Granddaughters. I understand that my granddaughter could even be his granddaughter once she puts her hand on this book, and that it is a book that is written to the daughters of the nation in general. Am I correct, sir?
Absolutely.
Okay, fine. Closer to the Church. Well, Mr. Singh did a second launch in Tobago, and that is where I met him, and I had the privilege to hear some of the presenters there speak about the book. I have since read the book, and I am even more enthralled because when you hear Closer to the Church, I knew it was something where, to use the word against, sparingly, I thought it was about religion, but from what I understood when I read the book, that it is not so much that Miriam and Nathan were against religion per se, either their Christianity, his Christianity with the Catholic Church, and she with her experience in Islam through her husband Thomas, but that they were dissatisfied with the way it was interpreted by the people that they were engaged with. Am I right in that?
Well, yes, but I just wanted to clarify a little more.
Yes, certainly.
Who here were 2 young people,
Yes.
one older than the other, Miriam, the woman being older
Yes,
than
about
than
6
Nathan.
years older.
And both had experiences because both were very much involved in religion. On one hand, Nathan was very much involved in Catholicism,
Yes.
and he knew what it was to do the pilgrimage and to do the novenas and all
he
of
was
that.
an acolyte.
And you name it. Miriam, on the other hand, was a devout Catholic before she became an Islamic woman.
Yes.
And having lived an Islamic life for all of her married life, all of 6 years, during which she had six children, that's
yes.
a child a year,
Yes.
she began to understand and to reflect on what Islamic meant, being Islamic meant to her and to a number of the young women who lived in the very poor environment in which she lived at Rose Hill. Yeah. And so the experiences gave them, as it were, a reason to want to do something, not to change their religion, but to improve their religion.
Yes.
And so the question of a conference for the ungodly, because Nathan was driven by the fact that he read profusely all newspapers, and he kept in touch with what was going on air and on little radio. He had a shortwave radio and things like that. And he found it just alarming that the concerns that he had been experiencing and he felt strongly about were the kinds of things that he was hearing about on world news all the time. Every time he saw a foreign paper, he saw the issue of the clergy abusing children in particular, both both
Male and
boys
female,
and
yes.
girls, you know. And so he wanted to do something because in his mind he had heard the saying growing up all the time, closer to the church. But it is not, it never ends there. The other part of that statement is further from God. And so he wanted to address the people who were further from God, but
Yes.
who indeed were in the bosom of the church.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So in the book, it alluded to the fact that religion across the board has issues.
Yeah.
And it is not necessarily just one or the other.
Well, in the context of Trinidad, it is a multi-religious society.
Yes.
So Nathan couldn't forget at all the headline in one newspaper which talked about Hindu priests raping school children and all, you know. It was in fact reflected in a calypso sung by one of the local bards. And so the reality is that they wanted to find a solution, but they never knew each other before. And Nathan, being the kind of individual he was, he went to the newspaper and he gave them a story, and he told them, look, I'm going to have this international conference, and the conference is going to be here, and blah, 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 blah. And anybody who is interested in being part of the conference should call me on a number. He boldly gave his cell number. And the article was in fact read by Miriam, who lived miles and miles away from Nathan.
Yeah, because he was from the country Las Bajos.
Yes. And I have positioned in the book, Las Bajos is a real name, but I have positioned it in the east as against the south where it is.
Okay.
And so he wanted to have this conference. And strangely enough, Miriam read the article and said, well, maybe she would. And she did call him. And they agreed to meet. And of all the meeting places, they met in the market.
Yes, by the Swiss vendor.
So it is an interesting twist there. And from day one, their first meeting, they gelled. And, you know, one could deduce, based on some of the stuff that yours truly have written, that they probably were attracted to each other physically as well as mentally. But that never happened. The reality is this, that the conference itself was a bit of a challenge. And Miriam, being the smarter and the wiser of the two, took the initiative to take the lead role without changing the fact that he was the conference chairman. So even though she was the lead role, they had a co-chair. And they had this conference. She went all over. She tapped into all her alumni and what have you to raise funds. It was really just an interesting time for her.
I found the book interesting from that aspect of preparing for the conference, because it was something that it never crossed my mind, that the amount of intrigue and money that goes into the conference, setting up the secretariat, and her first set of money she even started with was $600,000, and the amount of money she had to go to Boston to raise. And so that is why I love to read. Because things that under normal circumstances we take for granted, when you get into the mind of somebody else, it forces you to expand your thoughts. Because, okay, I've been to conferences. It's not like if I don't know anything about them, you know. But it is just that we so tunnel vision into what we do. And I have never thought about thinking about the behind the scenes. And as to the fact, I would like that Miriam was smarter. They had different roles and different experiences, and although she was smarter, she was not the one who came up with Conference for the Ungodly. I would like to say she was more exposed. She was more experienced. And although she was more exposed and experienced, she was humble enough to want to share what it is she had. And throughout the book, I have found that both Nathan and Miriam proved themselves to people who have really made an effort to live a spiritual life to some degree. Because I've not found any of them overly aggressive or anything. They were just very humble and calm. At least everybody in the book, more or less, you know. Because it is not a book that I found, although it spelled out all the different ways that religion has erred. But it did not come from a point of condemnation and blame. It was just stating the facts. And which is something that I have been stating over time, you know, in my small way, that we cannot get past certain things if we continue to cast blame and aspersions for things that have happened, the habits of the past that we interpret as tradition now. So I found that very refreshing. One of the things, though, I would like to ask is, how do you think, as a people, we could go about addressing the needs that need to be met as far as religion and the clergy being more straightforward? Well, straightforward isn't really the word. More correct in their behavior, speaking more, doing as they say. And how do you think that they could be kept in line even if they err?
Deirdre, everything in life I have come to conclude, and it's my considered position, that leadership determines the direction of all societies, all organizations, all living organisms. Mm-hmm. And if you are blessed with strong leadership at the helm, all religions would be strong and effective religions, because religion is not a bad thing. Religion is a very important element
Guidance, yes,
in terms of the development of societies. But if you have leaders who are perhaps just as guilty as the people whom they oversee and supervise, then you have a really difficult society, a difficult organization, a difficult religion. And my fear is that too often in the history of any society, we are throwing up leaders that are not worthy of the office of leadership, be it a bishop, an archbishop, an imam.
But don't you think, so sorry, that it would be difficult for us to raise that quality of leadership of which you speak if the soil with which in it is nurtured is not equal to the task?
Well, let me put it this way. I think if you feel you have a calling, and I've often felt that people who become priests and clergy are people who believe they have a calling.
It should be a vocation, not a job.
Yeah. And you get there, the expectation is that you would do the job that you have volunteered for. Because nobody puts a gun to your head and says, listen, I want you to become a priest. You decide that you want to become a priest, a pastor. You decide you want to become a pundit, as in the case of Hinduism, or an imam in the case of Islam.
Yeah.
That with it carries a tremendous responsibility, which oftentimes ought not to be a burden. Responsibilities ought not to be a burden. And I want to repeat that, because people believe that when you accept responsibilities, it's a burden of responsibilities. I see it totally different. I believe that you ought not to volunteer for an assignment if you know you are incapable of carrying it out. And the same holds true for politics and politicians. One might argue that the priest and the pundit And the imam can be likened to the officers of the state, be it the ministers or the senators or what have you, because they administer over a flock. They administer over human beings, or rather, I ought not to say administer over, administer to the needs of human
On
beings.
behalf of,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so, if you can't do the job, don't volunteer. And so, my own feeling is that once you put on the frock and you do all your training and what have you, understand that your life must change and your life must now represent the future. I think that has come out in the book.
Yes, but I want to go a little deeper. The intent some people have when they take in office, I think must be put into the mix. Because if I go in with the intention of gleaning from the glamour of the position, as opposed to the service and the humility that a position takes, it means that we lose before we begin. Because the attitude with which we enter anything, the understanding and depth with which we go into a service. If I want to be a politician or a man of the cloth, because of the respect that is given me, or how the masses, the rest of society will now look on me. If that is the reason, then the amount of pomp and show-offedness that I go in there with, it is not what makes for good service in that role. So I think it comes down to how we feel about things and what leads us to feel and think a certain way.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong at all. But from my perspective, and I'm staying focused on closer to the church.
Yes.
What we have found, not a day passes, no, not a period passes, when the spotlight is not, as it were, repeatedly pointed at wrongdoing by the clergy in various denominations.
Yes.
And that tells you that in the same way that the spotlight continues to be pointed at the politicians, be it Donald Trump or Boris Johnson,
yes,
or Putin,
whoever,
you
close,
follow?
oh, yeah.
Or we are finding out like Sarkozy, he's just gone to prison.
Okay.
As a former French, and he was alleged to have been such a good president for France. Once the spotlight is pointed, you tend to see all the ills in that particular institution. And wherever you turn across the world, religion, for all the good it may have been meant to convey, has conveyed equally a lot of heartbreak, hardship, and sadness. Think about how the Christians set about taking from the first world people of the United States and Canada. Think about the recent reports that are coming out of Canada where they're finding all these graves.
Yes, children.
The children. And these were children, when you know the history of that, you ask yourself, who in God's name would believe that that is God's work?
And you went further back, the Magdalena.
Yeah, in Ireland.
Yes.
And so the whole question is, if religion is intended to be something so pure and so good and noble and decent, how could men and women be allowed to bastardize it, to turn it into something that is so cruel and so unkind and so vicious? And that is the issue about closer to the church. We, in the context of we the people, must always resist the temptations to do what is wrong. And when I say we the people, I mean we the clergy, we the people who preside over religion, must be conscious that there is a God. And if there's a God, you won't be doing ungodly things.
Well, okay, let me try and unwrap that, unpack it. Could it be that unnecessary pressure is being put on the clergy and politicians when we expect them to be perfect? Could it be that because we live in a world that has so much pretense that we are not accepting who the human is? Because over the years that we have lived, we delve into history, we watch what is going on now. We are not a peaceful, loving, kind, docile people. And once we ascribe a title to somebody, whether it's reverend, imam, whatever, it does not mean that this person automatically stops being a human being and becomes a saint. So then we are speaking about now, how do we hold people accountable? Because people have really lovely things to say, inspiring words and all that sort of thing. It does not mean that they are not struggling personally in their lives.
So this, herein lies the catch. Mm-hmm. Like every organization, mm-hmm. you must have checks and balances.
Right, right.
But when you take a priest and you assign him to a parish in a far distant rural place, that priest, whether he wants to do it or not, is seen and perceived to be above the flock. In doing that, if that priest is a weak and worthless person, if he is a rascal, a scoundrel, and a vagabond, he will abuse the power of the clergy. And that is what has given rise to Closer to the Church.
Right. I find that kind of harsh, though, eh?
Well, I don't know.
Because, not that more is not expected.
To whom much is given, much is expected.
Right, that is what I'm alluding
to. And I'm saying to you, if you have been so blessed to become a priest, a pastor, an imam, a pundit, you have the responsibility.
Yes.
Then you have, if you want to use burden with responsibility on this occasion,
yes.
you have the burden of responsibility to be the best that there ever was or is.
Yes.
If you are assigned the assignment to be the mayor or to be the minister of government or the prime minister, the responsibility is yours and yours alone to execute in a way that people for centuries will remember your contribution.
Okay, fine. So that now speaks of support systems. Because none of us are island or could do anything alone, and we cannot really see how we are.
Many people believe that they are an island and that in them resides all the power, and so the issue of consultation and working with others becomes less important.
Yeah, well, all those things are ills of the society, imbalances where things is going wrong. Because if we're talking about democracy or serving, it's not a one-way flow.
Well, it is a one-way flow depending on who you are. Take, for example, what is currently going on in the continental United States with this fellow Trump. Mm-hmm. It is almost uncanny. It's if you were given to believe in sorcery, you would believe that Trump is a sorcerer,
wizard of
the highest order, yeah. Because he seemed to have gotten all these people who at one point in their lives, they no longer appear that way now, but at one point in their lives, all these Republican politicians, in my view, seem balanced and seem to offer a possibility of a better society. But now, when I read what is going on, I see main camp fall over again.
Okay. We could go round in circles if we do not divide what we think should be and what is. Because constant reference to what is difficult for us to talk about how we find it really should be. Because somebody in power, and it is not that I am defending people in power or the clergy or anything, but I'm just trying to look at the reality of the situation. Because once you're in a place of power, people are going to do things to subvert you. They're going to come with mango, they're going to come with this, a million and one different things. And I say mango, meaning just any kind of bribe. Whatever they think, they will research your history, they will find out your weakness. So, I am talking about what is, what do we need for it to be as it is? How would it be as if somebody dropped from Mars, come and see what is going on now, without having to refer to what was done traditionally, and they're going to lay down the law? This is how we are going to get politicians and clergy who would be upright and serve without bias. What else?
I know you don't want me to answer that.
Why not? Because that's where it's heading. That's what the conference of the ungodly would lead to. And with the...
But Deidre, we also had the redeemed sinners session.
Yes, let's not forget the redeemed sinners. But there's nothing wrong in saying, I liked that redeemed sinners section, right? At the end of the conference, folks, they had a section, redeemed sinners, and this is where people were able to confess and say, well, this is how I did, this is how I think. Just let it out, unburden themselves. Even people who were accused wrongfully, I realized, came to the redeemed sinners, really still questioning and going in deeply and say, listen, I don't think I did anything wrong. I did everything. But keep still searching. Lord, if there's anything I have done, I ask for forgiveness. So the book also spoke about the importance of forgiveness. I keep saying that we hold ourselves too rigid. We cannot, any of these, the church, politician, all those things, we cannot really point fingers too deeply unless we look at ourselves, who we are. Because it is the same person, all of us exposed to the same thing, and is one of us they're going to take and put in office. So what qualities do we need to rise above that, and what kind of support we need to ensure that we are not lured away from what we believe?
I hear you. I hear you loud and clear. And in more ways than one, if I remain focused on the book.
Yes.
There are two anthems in the book.
Yes.
The first is Miriam's wrap-up of the conference, on the main body of the conference.
Very powerful.
And then the second would be Nathan's at the end of the conference.
He said something before too, that I found very telling. I'd put it somewhere, but of course I can't find it.
And Nathan, in my view, really came to his own with that wrap-up, that tail end
Yes,
speech.
when he ended the conference.
Because in more ways than one, not only did he express appreciation for all who did, but he took the reader through, as it were, what the conference achieved. You follow? And so those two anthems, to me, are perhaps just as critical as the point that you've raised, in that people